Pass the salt. Those 3 words fell like stones across the dinner table at Hillcrest Country Club. I had just told my family I had breast cancer, and my father, Merrick Stone, couldn't even look up from his prime rib. The silence stretched, like a wound, until Mom nervously laughed and changed the subject to my brother's promotion. That night, I sat in my apartment in Brookhaven Heights, staring at my phone, replaying the moment that shattered everything I thought I knew about family. But here's what they didn't know. For 8 years, I'd been the invisible foundation holding their perfect reputation together. I was their ghostwriter, their event coordinator, their crisis manager, their everything. So when morning came, I started deleting. By noon, the Stone family's carefully crafted image was crumbling in real time. My name is Daisy Graham, and this is how I taught them that some wounds cut deeper than cancer. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Hillcrest Country Club dining room buzzed with the usual Saturday evening crowd. Crystal glasses clinked against fine china, and the soft murmur of polite conversation filled the air like expensive perfume. At table 14, the Stone family sat in their customary formation. Dad at the head, Mom to his right, my brother Alaric across from me, and me in the corner seat where I'd been relegated since childhood. I'd been dreading this moment for 3 weeks. Ever since Dr. Patterson had delivered the diagnosis that changed everything. Stage 2 invasive ductal carcinoma. The words still felt foreign in my mouth, like speaking a language I'd never learned. But tonight was the night I'd finally tell them. The night I'd need their support more than ever before. The Wellington is exceptional tonight, Mom commented, delicately cutting her beef. Almost as good as that place in Manhattan where the Harrisons took us last month. Dad nodded approvingly, his attention focused entirely on the meal before him. Merrick Stone never met a social occasion he couldn't turn into a networking opportunity, but family dinners were his stage for displaying the success he'd cultivated so carefully over the decades. Tonight, he wore his favorite navy blazer with the gold buttons, the one that made him look like old money even though we both knew he'd clawed his way up from a 2-bedroom apartment in Riverside District. Speaking of the Harrisons, Alaric chimed in, straightening his tie, I got that promotion at Zenith Financial, senior vice president now, youngest in the company's history. The table erupted in congratulations. Mom reached over to squeeze his hand. Dad beamed with pride, raising his wine glass for an impromptu toast. To my son, the future of the Stone legacy. I watched the scene unfold with the detached observation of someone who'd witnessed this performance countless times. Alaric's successes were always family victories. His achievements reflected well on the Stone name, elevated our status in Willowbrook society, gave Dad new bragging rights at the Pinnacle golf course every Sunday morning. What they didn't know was that I'd written half of Alaric's presentation for that promotion. I'd spent 3 nights crafting his quarterly analysis, researching market trends, and polishing his talking points until they gleamed. Just like I'd ghostwritten his college application essays, edited his wedding vows, and managed the publicity for his charity marathon last year that got him featured in Willowbrook Gazette. But tonight wasn't about Alaric. Tonight was about me, finally stepping into the light I'd been hiding from for 28 years. Actually, I said, setting down my fork with deliberate calm, I have some news to share too. The conversation paused. 3 pairs of eyes turned toward me with the kind of polite attention usually reserved for minor interruptions. I went to see Dr. Patterson last week, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. The tests came back. I have breast cancer. The words hung in the air like smoke. I watched their faces carefully, searching for the shock, the concern, the immediate outpouring of support I'd imagined during the sleepless night since my diagnosis. Instead, Dad glanced at his watch, then looked toward the server approaching with dessert menus. Pass the salt, he said to Mom, as if I'd mentioned something as trivial as the weather. The salt shaker clinked against his plate. Mom's nervous laugh cut through the silence. Well, that's unfortunate timing, Daisy. But you know how resilient you are. You'll figure it out. She turned immediately to Alaric. Now tell us more about this promotion celebration the company is planning. I sat frozen, my announcement dissolving into the background noise of clinking silverware and casual conversation. They continued eating as if nothing had happened, as if I'd told them I'd bought new curtains or changed my phone plan. The server appeared beside our table, pen poised over his notepad. Can I interest anyone in our dessert selection this evening? The chocolate soufflé sounds divine, Mom said brightly. Alaric, you should try it. You deserve a celebration. My brother grinned, basking in the continued attention. Make that 2 soufflés. Tonight calls for indulgence. Dad nodded approvingly. Add the vintage port to the order. Nothing's too good for my successful son. I excused myself quietly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor with more volume than my cancer announcement had generated. None of them looked up as I walked toward the restroom, my legs feeling strangely disconnected from my body. In the mirror above the marble sink, I stared at my reflection. Same brown hair I'd worn in a conservative bob for years. Same understated makeup that never drew attention. Same invisible presence that had defined my role in this family since birth. But something behind my eyes had shifted. Something fundamental had cracked. I thought about all the times I'd made them look good. The speeches I'd written for Dad's community awards. The thank you cards I'd crafted for Mom's charity events. Each one personalized and heartfelt enough to secure the next donation. The crisis management when Alaric's college roommate had posted those photos on social media, and I'd spent 48 hours calling in favors and managing damage control to keep the story from reaching the local newspapers. For 8 years since, graduating from Oakwood University, I'd been their invisible support system, their reputation manager, their ghostwriter, their problem solver. I lived in a modest apartment in Brookhaven Heights while they maintained their sprawling home in Willowbrook Estates, funded partly by the consulting work I did under Dad's company, Name. When Dad's business partner had threatened to sue over contract disputes, I'd researched legal precedents and drafted the settlement terms that saved them hundreds of thousands in legal fees. When Mom's social rival had spread rumors about their financial troubles, I'd orchestrated a counter-narrative through carefully placed stories and charitable donations that restored their standing. I was the architect of their success, the engineer of their image, the curator of their legacy. And when I needed them most, when I faced the greatest challenge of my life, I'd received the emotional equivalent of passing the salt. Walking back to the table, I observed them with new clarity. They were laughing now, Dad regaling them with some story about his golf game while Mom and Alaric hung on every word. The dessert had arrived, 2 perfect chocolate soufflés with raspberry coulis artfully drizzled around the plates. Feeling better? Mom asked without looking up as I reclaimed my seat. Much better, I replied, and for the first time all evening, I was telling the truth. The drive home to Brookhaven Heights usually took 25 minutes, but tonight I took the scenic route along Millfield River, needing time to process what had just occurred. The cancer diagnosis had been devastating, but survivable. Stage 2 with aggressive treatment meant good odds. I could fight this battle. But the realization that I'd been fighting alone all along, that cut deeper than any surgeon's blade ever could. My apartment felt different when I walked through the door. The familiar space that had always seemed cozy now felt like a sanctuary. My laptop sat open on the kitchen table, surrounded by the usual chaos of projects I managed for them. Grant applications for Dad's nonprofit ventures, social media content for Mom's garden club presidency, research for Alaric's upcoming business presentations. I made a cup of tea and sat down, staring at the screen filled with their obligations and my invisible labor. For the first time since my diagnosis, I wasn't thinking about treatment schedules or survival statistics. I was thinking about survival of a different kind. the kind that meant finally seeing clearly after years of looking through fog. Tomorrow, I would call my oncologist and schedule surgery. Tomorrow, I would begin the fight for my physical health. But tonight, I was going to start fighting for something else entirely. Something I should have fought for years ago. My dignity. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that usually made me appreciate Brookhaven Heights. The changing leaves created a canopy of gold and crimson outside my kitchen window, and the distant sound of church bells from St. Matthew's Cathedral provided a peaceful soundtrack to what should have been a quiet morning of reflection. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, staring at an email from Dad that had arrived at 6:30 a.m. Daisy, need the quarterly report for the Willowbrook Chamber of Commerce breakfast on Tuesday. Also, can you handle the seating arrangements for the foundation gala next month? Your mother thinks we need to separate the Hendersons from the Pratts after their divorce. Draft something diplomatic. Thanks. Dad, not, how are you feeling? Or, let's talk about your diagnosis, or even, sorry about dinner last night. Just another assignment delivered with the casual assumption that I would handle it immediately and perfectly, as always. My phone buzzed. A text from Mom. Daisy, can you pick up dry cleaning for your father? Also need grocery list for next week's dinner party. The usual efficiency, please. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Then Alaric. Sis, need help with presentation for the Morrison account. You're so good at this stuff. Can you have something ready by tomorrow morning? 3 separate demands before 8 a.m. on a Sunday. From the family that couldn't spare 30 seconds of concern when I'd announced I had cancer less than 24 hours earlier. I set the phone aside and walked to my bathroom mirror, lifting my shirt to examine my left breast where the tumor had taken residence. Dr. Patterson had shown me the imaging, pointing out the irregularly shaped mass that would require surgery within 2 weeks. Chemotherapy would likely follow, depending on the biopsy results. My hair would probably fall out. I might be sick for months. But my family's primary concern was whether I could handle their seating charts and grocery lists. The doorbell rang, interrupting my spiral of bitter reflection. Through the peephole, I saw my neighbor Mrs. Chen holding a covered casserole dish. I brought you some soup, she said when I opened the door. Tom mentioned he saw you at the oncology center last week. I know it's none of my business, but I wanted you to know you're in my thoughts. Mrs. Chen, who barely knew me beyond polite hallway greetings, had noticed my hospital visits and cared enough to make soup. My family, who I'd supported financially and professionally for nearly a decade, couldn't be bothered to ask a follow-up question. That's incredibly kind of you, I managed, accepting the warm dish. Really, you didn't have to. Nonsense. When my Harold went through his treatment 3 years ago, the hardest part wasn't the medical stuff. It was feeling alone. She patted my arm gently. You're not alone, dear. If you need anything, rides to appointments, help with groceries, someone to sit with you during chemo, just knock. After she left, I sat at my kitchen table with the soup growing cold, staring at the email demands from my family. Mrs. Chen, a 70-year-old woman who barely knew me, had offered more genuine support in 5 minutes than my own blood relatives had managed in 28 years. The breaking point wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a moment of explosive anger or tearful revelation. It was quiet and crystalline, like ice forming on a window. I simply looked at my laptop screen, at years of invisible labor and thankless sacrifice, and realized I was done. Not done with cancer treatment. Not done with fighting for my health. But done with fighting for people who saw me as a resource rather than a person. I opened a new document and began typing. Not the Chamber of Commerce report Dad expected. Not the seating chart Mom requested. Not Alaric's presentation materials. Instead, I started documenting everything I'd done for them over the past 8 years. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records showing the money I'd lent Dad's consulting firm during lean months, never repaid despite his frequent boasts about profitable quarters. Drafts of speeches that had won him community leadership awards, every word written in my apartment, at midnight. Email chains where I'd negotiated contracts, resolved disputes, and managed crises while they took credit. I found the folder of Mom's charity correspondence, hundreds of letters I'd crafted to major donors. The sophisticated fundraising strategies that had tripled the garden club's annual revenue. The social media campaigns that had elevated their family standing in Willowbrook society. Most damning of all, I found Alaric's promotion file. Every presentation, every analysis, every strategic recommendation that had impressed his supervisors enough to make him the youngest senior vice president in company history. My research, my insights, my late nights crafting the perfect arguments for his success. They'd built their reputations on my foundation, elevated their status with my invisible labor, and secured their futures with my unpaid contributions. And when I faced the greatest challenge of my life, they'd ask me to pass the salt. My phone rang. Dad's name appeared on the screen. Daisy, about that report. I need it by tonight. The chamber meeting got moved to Monday morning, and you know how important this presentation is for maintaining our community standing. Dad, I said quietly, I told you last night that I have cancer. A pause. Right, yes. That's unfortunate. But you're tough. You'll handle it. This report, however, is time-sensitive. Can you prioritize it? I'm having surgery in 2 weeks. Surgery is what? A few hours? You'll have plenty of recovery time to catch up on projects. Look, Daisy, I need you to focus here. This chamber position could lead to bigger opportunities. The whole family benefits when our reputation grows. The whole family. As if I'd ever benefited from the reputation I'd spent 8 years building for them. I'll get you the report, I said. Excellent. You always come through. That's why you're so valuable to us. Valuable. Not loved, not cherished. Not family. Valuable. After he hung up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, listening to the distant church bells and the sound of families laughing in the courtyard below. Normal families, probably. The kind where cancer announcements prompted hugs instead of salt requests. I thought about Mrs. Chen's offer to drive me to chemotherapy appointments, about Dr. Patterson's nurse who had given me her personal cell phone number in case I needed someone to talk to during difficult moments, about my college friend Sarah, who had called 3 times since my diagnosis just to check in, people who barely knew me had shown more compassion in 1 week than my family had demonstrated in a lifetime. The report Dad wanted sat unfinished on my screen. The seating chart Mom expected remained blank. Alaric's presentation deadline ticked closer with each passing hour. For 8 years, I had prioritized their needs above my own health, my own dreams, my own life. I had been their ghostwriter, their crisis manager, their invisible support system, always available, always reliable, always there when they needed something accomplished. But ghosts, I realized, could choose to stop haunting. I closed the laptop without saving any of the work they'd demanded. Instead, I opened a different kind of document. A detailed inventory of everything I managed for them, every account I had access to, every system I had built to support their success. Tomorrow, I would begin surgery preparations and cancer treatment, planning. But tonight, I would prepare for a different kind of procedure. The surgical removal of toxic relationships that had been spreading through my life far longer than any tumor. The autumn wind picked up outside my window, scattering leaves, across the courtyard where families continued their Sunday afternoon activities. Inside my apartment, I sat surrounded by years of evidence proving my worth to people who would never see it. But I was finally beginning to see it myself, and that changed everything. Monday morning brought the familiar weight of obligation. But, for the first time in 8 years, I didn't immediately open my laptop to check the family's urgent demands. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with coffee and a notepad, methodically listing every single thing I managed for the Stone family empire. The scope was staggering when laid out in black and white. Financial contributions. Over the past 8 years, I'd loaned Dad's consulting firm nearly $80,000 during cash flow problems. The loans were documented in informal email exchanges, always framed as temporary assistance that would be repaid once the next big contract came through. None of it had been repaid. Instead, Dad had used the money to lease the BMW he drove to, client meetings and the luxury office space in Willowbrook's premier business district. Professional ghostwriting. I found files containing 247 documents I'd written under various family members' names. Dad's award-winning speeches for the Willowbrook Leadership Council, Mom's fundraising letters that had generated over $500,000 for local charities, Alaric's business presentations that had secured his rapid promotions. Every word, crafted in my apartment, usually between midnight and dawn, always attributed to someone else. Crisis management. The digital trail revealed dozens of reputation emergencies I'd quietly resolved. When Dad's business partner accused him of contract violations, I'd researched legal precedents and drafted settlement terms that avoided costly litigation. When rival Garden Club members had spread gossip about Mom's spending habits, I'd orchestrated a counter-narrative through strategic charitable giving and carefully placed social media posts. When Alaric's college photos had threatened to surface during his job search, I'd contacted news outlets, social media platforms, and professional networks to contain the damage. Social coordination. Every dinner party, charity gala, and family celebration for the past 8 years had been planned and executed by me. I maintained their social calendar, managed RSVP lists, coordinated catering, selected gifts for important occasions, and handled thank you correspondence. They showed up looking gracious and organized while I managed every detail from behind the scenes. Digital presence. I discovered that I had administrative access to all their social media accounts, their business websites, their professional profiles, and their email marketing systems. For years, I'd been crafting their online personas, building their digital reputations, and managing their professional networks. Their impressive LinkedIn profiles, their charity's successful fundraising campaigns, their business's 5-star reviews, all curated and maintained by me. The revelation hit like physical pain. I wasn't just their unpaid assistant or occasional helper. I was the invisible architect of their entire public identity. Remove my contributions, and their carefully constructed success would collapse like a house built on sand. My phone buzzed with Dad's daily morning demands. Need the Henderson contract analysis by noon. Also, schedule a meeting with the mayor's office about the waterfront development project. Make sure you emphasize our community involvement angle. I stared at the message, remembering his words from Saturday night. Pass the salt. As if my cancer diagnosis carried the same urgency as seasoning his prime rib. Instead of immediately responding to his demands, I continued my inventory. The deeper I dug, the more extensive my invisible empire became. I managed their insurance, policies, maintained their professional licenses, handled their tax document organization, and even managed the passwords for their various online accounts. Then I found something that made my coffee grow cold in my hands. In my email archives, I discovered a conversation between Dad and a potential business partner from 6 months ago. The partner had specifically mentioned being impressed by Mr. Stone's analytical capabilities and writing style in their initial proposal review. Dad had forwarded the compliment to Mom with the comment, "Another satisfied client. Good thing Daisy handles the technical writing. Leaves me free to focus on the big picture strategy." He knew. They all knew. I wasn't their secret weapon or hidden advantage. I was their deliberate deception. They had built their reputations by taking credit for my work while simultaneously treating me like the family disappointment. The invisible daughter who couldn't quite get her life together, who lived in a modest apartment while they thrived in luxury, who seemed to drift through life without purpose or achievement. The purpose and achievement had been there all along. It just had their names on it. My laptop showed 17 unread messages from family members, each containing fresh demands and urgent deadlines. The routine was so established that my phone had learned to categorize their requests automatically. Dad's business needs, Mom's social obligations, Alaric's career advancement projects. But today, instead of diving into their priorities, I opened a different kind of planning document. I began with the financial systems. Every bank account, every automatic payment, every loan arrangement I'd established to keep their operations running smoothly. Dad's business accounts where I was listed as an authorized user for handling client payments. Mom's charity accounts, where I managed donation processing and expense tracking. Even Alaric's personal accounts where I'd helped him establish automated investment strategies. Then the digital infrastructure. Website hosting accounts registered in my name for their various ventures. Social media management tools under my subscription. Professional software licenses I'd purchased and shared. Cloud storage systems containing years of their documents and correspondence. The professional relationships were more complex but equally crucial. Vendors who knew me as the family's primary contact, service providers who had my phone number as the emergency point of contact, professional networks where I'd established connections on their behalf. Most importantly, I controlled the narrative, systems that had built their reputations. The donor databases for Mom's charities, the client relationship management system for Dad's business, the professional networks that had facilitated Alaric's career advancement. For 8 years, I'd been the central nervous system of the Stone family's success, and like any nervous system, if I stopped functioning, everything else would shut down. The planning took most of Monday afternoon. I created detailed spreadsheets documenting my access to their various systems, my contributions to their current projects, and my ongoing commitments to their professional obligations. The scope was overwhelming. I'd been supporting not just their personal needs but their entire professional infrastructure. By evening, I had developed a comprehensive understanding of my actual position within their family dynamic. I wasn't the disappointing daughter who needed their occasional patience and support. I was the foundation that enabled their success while being systematically minimized and dismissed. The cancer diagnosis had been a test, a moment when I'd needed their emotional support more than they'd ever needed my professional assistance. Their response had been to ask me to pass the salt and then immediately assign me additional work projects. But their response had also been revealing. It showed me exactly how they viewed my value and my place in their lives. I was useful when they needed something accomplished, invisible when they wanted to celebrate achievements, and irrelevant when I needed something from them. That night, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Dr. Patterson's office, confirming my surgery schedule and beginning the paperwork for medical leave from my freelance clients. The second was to Mrs. Chen, accepting her offer to drive me to medical appointments and asking if she'd be available to help with grocery shopping during recovery. I didn't call my family. For the first time in 8 years, their urgent demands would wait until tomorrow. Instead, I spent the evening creating a different kind of strategic plan. Not for their next business venture or social event or crisis management situation, but for my own future. A future where my value wouldn't be measured by my usefulness to people who couldn't spare 30 seconds of concern when I faced the greatest challenge of my life. The plan was surprisingly simple in concept but would be complex in execution. I would systematically withdraw my support from their various enterprises, reclaim the systems I'd built, and redirect my considerable talents toward building something that belonged entirely to me. They had taught me that family wasn't about unconditional love, or mutual support. It was about utility and convenience. So I would apply their lesson with the precision they'd trained me to use for their benefit. Tomorrow, I would begin the careful process of dismantling the invisible empire I'd built for them. Not out of cruelty or revenge, but out of the quiet recognition that I deserved better than being asked to pass the salt when I announced I had cancer. The autumn wind rattled my apartment windows as I closed my laptop and prepared for bed. In 2 weeks, surgeons would remove the tumor from my breast. But tonight, I'd started the process of removing something far more toxic from my life. The illusion that I owed my family everything while they owed me nothing in return. Tuesday arrived, gray and drizzling, the kind of October weather that made Brookhaven Heights feel isolated from the world. Perfect conditions for what I was about to do. I woke up at 5 a.m., not from anxiety, but from the crystalline clarity that comes when you finally understand exactly what needs to be done. My coffee tasted different that morning, not bitter, with stress, but rich with possibility. The email queue showed 23 urgent messages from family members, each flagged as high priority. Dad needed the Chamber of Commerce presentation finished and formatted. Mom required immediate attention. For the charity gala seating arrangements, Alaric had sent his Morrison account materials at midnight with a note saying, "Need this polished and ready by 8 a.m. tomorrow." For 8 years, these demands had triggered immediate action from me. Today, I read them like historical documents from a previous life. Instead of opening their projects, I began with the financial systems. Dad's business accounts were surprisingly easy to address. As an authorized user, I had legitimate access to make changes. I systematically removed my name from all accounts, updated contact information to reflect only his details, and transferred back to my personal accounts every dollar I'd contributed over the years. The digital trail was clear. These were repayments of documented loans, not theft. The process took 3 hours and recovered $79,400 that had been sitting in their various accounts as temporary assistance. Money I'd lent during cash flow problems, never repaid despite years of profitable operations. Next came the digital infrastructure I'd built for their success. The website hosting accounts were registered in my name and paid through my credit cards. I downloaded complete backups of their sites, then suspended the hosting services. Within minutes, Dad's consulting firm website, Mom's charity foundation site, and the family's professional portfolio pages went dark. Their social media presence required more delicate handling. I had administrative access to all accounts, but I needed to be strategic. Instead of deleting everything, I removed my management access and changed all passwords, then sent each family member their individual login credentials with a note explaining they were now responsible for their own digital presence. The professional software subscriptions were next. Design programs, accounting software, project management tools, email marketing platforms, all purchased under my name to support their various ventures. I canceled the subscriptions and transferred the remaining balances back to my accounts. Noon, the Stone family's digital empire was systematically shutting down. Their websites displayed suspension notices, their social media accounts were locked out of management tools, and their professional software access had expired. My phone started ringing at 12:15. Dad first, predictably. "Daisy, something's wrong with the website. Clients can't access our portfolio, and I have a presentation this afternoon." "The hosting expired," I said calmly. "You'll need to set up your own account." "What do you mean, set up our own account? You handle the technical stuff." "Not anymore. I sent you the instructions by email." A pause. "This is not the time for whatever point you're trying to make. I have clients depending on this website." "Dad, I have cancer. I'm reducing my commitments to focus on health." "Your health is fine. It's just surgery. Don't be dramatic." I hung up. Mom called 20 minutes later, her voice pitched higher than usual. "The charity website is down, and donors can't access. The gala information. You need to fix this immediately. I've transferred website management back to the charity board. They'll need to handle it themselves. Daisy, we don't know how to do that technical computer stuff. That's why we rely on you. I'm sure you'll figure it out. This is completely irresponsible. What will people think? They'll think the charity needs to hire professional help instead of relying on unpaid family labor. She hung up without another word. The afternoon brought increasing chaos. Alaric called 6 times before I answered. My presentation is a disaster, he said immediately. None of the files are accessible and I can't log into any of the research databases. Your login credentials are in your email. There are too many passwords and accounts. Can't you just handle it like always? No. What do you mean, no? I won't be handling your professional responsibilities anymore. You're a senior vice president at a major financial firm. I'm sure you can manage your own presentations. This is insane. You're sabotaging my career over some family dinner. Misunderstanding. This isn't sabotage, it's delegation. You're now responsible for your own success instead of taking credit for mine. The calls continued throughout the day, each more frantic than the last. But I was no longer their crisis manager, their technical support, or their invisible problem solver. I was a woman with cancer who needed to focus on treatment and recovery. The most satisfying moment came at 4 p.m. when I received an email from the Willowbrook Chamber of Commerce. Dad had apparently attempted to deliver his presentation using outdated materials from 2 years ago. Since he couldn't access the current version I'd prepared, the chamber had postponed his speaking engagement indefinitely. By evening, I had systematically dismantled 8 years of invisible labor. Their professional operations were grinding to a halt, their digital presence had gone dark, and their carefully maintained reputation systems were collapsing in real time. But I wasn't finished. The final phase involved reclaiming the intellectual property that had built their success. Every speech, every presentation, every strategic document I'd created was saved in my personal files with clear authorship metadata. I began uploading selected samples to professional portfolio websites under my own name. The cover letter I'd written for Dad's Community Leadership Award, now properly attributed to Daisy Graham, freelance communications specialist. The fundraising strategy that had tripled Mom's charity revenue, credited to my consulting services. The market analysis that had secured Alaric's promotion, documented as my professional work product. For years, they'd built their reputations on my foundation while treating me like the family failure. Now anyone searching for their professional capabilities would discover the true source of their success. My phone buzzed constantly throughout the evening, but I let the calls go to voicemail. The messages grew increasingly desperate as the full scope of their dependence became clear. Daisy, clients are asking questions about our website being down. The charity board is demanding explanations for the technical failures. My presentation, tomorrow, is completely ruined without your research. But between the panic and blame, not one message asked about my health, my surgery preparations, or how I was handling the cancer diagnosis that had started this entire revelation. That night, I sat in my quiet apartment with a cup of tea, listening to the sounds of normal families in the courtyard below. Children playing, couples talking, the peaceful rhythms of people who supported each other instead of exploiting each other. For the first time in 8 years, my evening was completely free. No urgent deadlines, no family crises to manage, no invisible labor to perform while they took credit for the results. The tumor in my breast would require surgery and treatment, but it hadn't spread beyond the original site. The toxic dynamics in my family, however, had metastasized throughout my entire adult life. Tonight, I'd begun the process of removing both diseases from my body and my life. Surgery was scheduled for next week. By then, the Stone family would have learned to function without their invisible support system, or they would face the consequences of never appreciating what they had until it was gone. Either way, I would finally be free to focus on healing and building a life that belonged entirely to me. Wednesday morning brought the storm I'd been expecting, but not from the direction I'd anticipated. At 6 a.m., my doorbell began ringing insistently, followed by heavy pounding on the door. Through the peephole, I saw Alaric pacing in the hallway, his usually perfect appearance disheveled. His tie was crooked, his hair uncombed, and his expression carried the kind of panic I'd only seen during his college finals week when he'd realized he'd forgotten about a major paper due the next morning. "Open up, Daisy," he called through the door. "We need to talk right now." I made coffee first, deliberately taking my time with the morning routine while he continued pounding. When I finally opened the door, he pushed past me into my apartment without invitation. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded, spinning around to face me. "My presentation yesterday was a complete disaster. Do you have any idea how that made me look in front of the Morrison account team?" "How did it make you look?" I asked calmly, settling into my kitchen chair with my coffee. "Like an amateur. Like someone who doesn't know his own business. Half the research was missing, the formatting was completely wrong, and I couldn't answer basic questions about market trends that should have been in my materials." "Market trends that I usually research for you?" "Yes, exactly. So why didn't you do your job?" I set down my coffee cup carefully. "My job is not managing your career presentations, Alaric. You're 26 years old and a senior vice president at a major financial firm. Your job is your job." His face flushed red. "Don't give me that independence speech. You've always helped with the technical stuff because you're good at it. That's how our family works. Everyone contributes their strengths." "What strength do I contribute to this family, in your opinion?" The question seemed to confuse him. "You handle the behind-the-scenes stuff, the research, the writing, the organization. You're good at staying in the background and making sure everything runs smoothly." "And what do you contribute?" "I'm the success story. The proof that the Stone family raises achievers. My career reflects well on all of us." I stared at him, seeing, clearly for the first time, how completely he believed this narrative. In his mind, his achievements were family victories, while my labor was simply my designated role in supporting those achievements. "Alaric, do you know how much money I've lent Dad's business over the years?" "Some. He mentioned you help out occasionally, when cash flow is tight." $79,000. Never repaid." His expression shifted slightly, but he waved dismissively. "Dad's business benefits all of us when it's successful. It's not like you needed the money sitting in your savings account. Do you know who wrote the quarterly analysis that got you promoted to senior vice president?" "I wrote it, with some research assistance from you. I wrote every word, the entire strategic framework, all the market research, every conclusion, and recommendation. You presented my work as your own." "That's not true. I provided the vision and direction. You just helped polish the technical details." I walked to my desk and pulled out a printed copy of his promotion presentation, marked up with my handwritten notes and revision timestamps. "This is the original draft I wrote. Look at the metadata, created on my laptop in my apartment at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday night while you were at your golf league. Every chart, every analysis, every strategic insight came from my research." Alaric glanced at the papers but pushed them away. "You're making this sound more significant than it was. Lots of executives have assistants who help with presentation materials. I'm not your assistant, I'm your sister, and I have cancer." "Right, the cancer thing. Look, that's unfortunate timing. But you can't just abandon your family responsibilities because of a medical issue. Mom and Dad are depending on you for the charity gala next month." The casual dismissal of my diagnosis as the cancer thing and unfortunate timing crystallized everything I'd realized about their perspective. I wasn't a person facing a life-threatening illness. I was a resource that was temporarily malfunctioning. "I won't be available for the charity gala, I said. I'll be recovering from surgery and possibly starting chemotherapy. Can't you schedule that medical stuff around family commitments? The gala is huge for Mom's reputation in the garden club. I walked to the door and opened it. You need to leave now. We're not finished talking about this. You've completely disrupted everyone's schedules with this selfish tantrum. Get out. After he left, I sat in the blessed quiet of my apartment, marveling at how completely my family had rewritten reality to justify their treatment of me. In their narrative, I was the selfish one for prioritizing cancer treatment over their convenience. I was abandoning my responsibilities instead of finally establishing appropriate boundaries. My phone rang constantly throughout the morning. Mom called 4 times, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails about the charity website being down and major donors asking questions. Dad left 3 messages about client meetings being compromised by technical failures he couldn't resolve. But the most revealing call came at 11 a.m. from someone I hadn't expected. My cousin Talira, who lived across the country and rarely contacted our immediate family. Daisy, I just heard about your cancer diagnosis. I'm so sorry you're going through this alone. Thank you. How did you find out? Aunt Margaret mentioned it when I called yesterday, but that's not why I'm calling. Are you okay financially? Do you need help with medical bills or time off work? The genuine concern in her voice made my throat tight. I'm managing, thank you. It means a lot that you asked. Of course I asked. Your family. But I have to say I'm confused about something. Aunt Margaret said you've been causing problems for everyone by not helping with their businesses anymore. She made it sound like you were being vindictive about some family argument. What exactly did she tell you? That you'd had some kind of disagreement at dinner, and now you were sabotaging their professional obligations out of spite. She said Uncle Merrick's business was suffering because you'd stopped doing computer work for them. I explained the actual situation, the cancer diagnosis, the salt passing incident, my decision to focus on health rather than maintaining their professional systems. Talira was quiet for a long moment. Wait, you've been doing their computer work all this time? Their websites, their presentations, all of that? For 8 years, yes. Holy shit, Daisy. Do you realize what that means? Uncle Merrick has been taking credit for work you did at family gatherings. He talks about his business success like he built everything himself. I'm starting to understand that. And now they're angry that you won't keep working for free while you're dealing with cancer treatment? Apparently, I'm being selfish and vindictive. That's insane. You know what's actually insane? I've been feeling guilty for years because I thought you were the only cousin who couldn't get her life together professionally. Uncle Merrick always made comments about you not having a real career path. The pieces clicked into place. My professional invisibility hadn't been an accident or oversight. It had been deliberately maintained to preserve their narrative of success while keeping me available for invisible labor. Talira, can I ask you something? At family gatherings, how do they usually introduce me? Usually something like "This is Daisy. She helps out with various projects," or "Daisy handles some administrative stuff for us." Always vague, like you were their part-time assistant or something. Never, "This is Daisy, the marketing strategist, who built our digital presence," or "Daisy wrote the speeches that won Dad his community awards," or "Daisy's research secured Alaric's promotion." I had no idea you were basically running their professional operations, Talira continued. If I'd known, I would have been asking for career advice from you instead of Uncle Merrick all these years. After we hung up, I sat with the realization that their dismissive treatment of me had extended far beyond our immediate family. They had systematically minimized my contributions in front of extended family, professional contacts, and social connections. My invisibility had been carefully cultivated to preserve their image as self-made successes. The afternoon brought a different kind of consequences. My phone buzzed with notifications from professional networking sites where I'd uploaded samples of my work. Former colleagues from college had started commenting and sharing, surprised to discover the scope of my professional capabilities. Had no idea you were doing this level of strategic work, Daisy. We should talk about consulting opportunities. Your portfolio is impressive. Are you available for freelance projects? This market analysis is exactly what our firm needs. Can sigh. We set up a meeting? For years I'd hidden my talents under other people's names. Now that my work was properly attributed, opportunities began emerging immediately. By evening, the contrast was stark. My family was experiencing professional chaos and blaming me for abandoning my responsibilities. Meanwhile, my actual professional network was discovering my capabilities and offering genuine career opportunities. The phone calls from family members had shifted from demands to attempts at negotiation. Mom's latest voicemail suggested we work out some kind of arrangement where I could handle just the essential items until they figured out alternative solutions. Dad's message was more direct. This tantrum has gone far enough. You're embarrassing. The family name with these technical failures. We can discuss a reasonable compromise. But there were no calls asking about my surgery date, my treatment plan, or whether I needed support during recovery. Even in crisis, their primary concern was how my medical needs affected their convenience. Mrs. Chen knocked on my door at 7 p.m. with a container of homemade soup and an offer to drive me to my pre-surgery appointment the next day. How are you holding up, dear? She asked, settling into my kitchen chair with the easy familiarity of someone who genuinely cared. Better than I expected, I said honestly. Clearer than I've felt in years. Good. Sometimes the worst diagnosis can lead to the best decisions about how to live. As she left, I realized she was right. The cancer diagnosis had been devastating, but it had also been clarifying. It had shown me exactly who I was in relation to my family. Not a beloved daughter facing a health crisis, but a useful resource that was temporarily malfunctioning. Tomorrow, I would begin surgery preparations and cancer treatment. But today, I'd successfully extracted myself from a different kind of toxic situation that had been spreading through my life far longer than any tumor. The immediate consequences of my decision were unfolding exactly as I'd expected. Professional chaos for them. Professional clarity for me. Panic on their part. Peace on mine. And this was just the beginning of what would happen when people who took me for granted finally realized what they'd lost. Thursday morning brought the first signs that my family's professional crisis was becoming public knowledge in ways they couldn't control. I discovered this while having coffee at Meredith's Cafe in downtown Brookhaven Heights, where I'd gone to escape the constant buzzing of my phone. The cafe was unusually busy for a weekday morning, filled with the kind of Willowbrook residents who typically avoided venturing into the more modest neighborhoods. I recognized several faces from Dad's social circle, including Patricia Whitmore from the Chamber of Commerce and Dr. Andrews from the Country Club. "Excuse me," Patricia approached my table hesitantly. "You're Daisy Graham, aren't you, Merrick Stone's daughter?" "Yes," I replied, uncertain where this conversation was heading. "I wanted to thank you personally for the work you did on our digital transition project last year. The website redesign and social media strategy were absolutely brilliant. We saw a 40% increase in membership applications." I blinked, surprised. "How did you know I worked on that project?" "Well, after the technical difficulties we experienced this week when your father's presentation materials were incomplete, I did some investigating. I found your professional portfolio online and realized you were behind many of the Chamber's most successful initiatives. Word was spreading faster than I'd anticipated. When Dad had delivered his incomplete presentation on Tuesday, it had apparently raised questions about the source of his usual professional polish. People were connecting the dots. "I hope you don't mind me saying," Patricia continued, lowering her voice, "but I was quite surprised to learn that you've been working behind the scenes for so long. Your strategic insights were what made our last fundraising campaign so successful, weren't they?" Before I could respond fully, Dr. Andrews appeared at my table. Daisy, I'm so glad I ran into you. I heard about your cancer diagnosis, and I wanted you to know you have our support. Also, I've been meaning to ask, are you available for consulting? Work? Our practice has been struggling with digital marketing, and after seeing your portfolio, we'd love to discuss hiring you directly. The conversation was surreal. For years, these people had interacted with me only as Merrick Stone's daughter. At social events, if they acknowledged me at all. Now they were recognizing me as a professional in my own right and offering genuine opportunities. I appreciate that, I said. I'm scheduling surgery next week, but I'll be available for new projects during my recovery period. Surgery? Patricia looked concerned. Nothing serious, I hope? Breast cancer. I'll be fine, but it requires some lifestyle adjustments. Both Patricia and Dr. Andrews expressed immediate sympathy and offered practical support, recommendations for oncologists, offers to help with appointments, genuine concern for my well-being. The contrast with my family's reaction was stark and painful. After they left, I sat with my coffee processing what had just happened. My professional work was finally being attributed correctly, and people were responding with respect and opportunity rather than dismissive expectations. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hi, Daisy. This is Jennifer Kim from Willowbrook Gazette. I'm working on a story about local entrepreneurs and would love to interview you about your consulting work. Several chamber members mentioned your name. Are you available this week? A newspaper interview. About my work. Under my name. Acknowledging my professional contributions. 8 years of invisibility beginning to dissolve in real time. I was still processing this development when I noticed a familiar figure approaching the cafe. Mom, walking quickly with the kind of determined stride that meant damage control. Mode was activated. She entered Meredith's cafe like she was entering hostile territory, her perfectly styled appearance slightly disheveled, and her usual confident smile replaced by barely controlled panic. There you are, she said, sliding into the chair across from me without invitation. We need to discuss this situation immediately. What situation? Don't pretend you don't know. Half of Willowbrook is asking questions about our family's business operations. Patricia Whitmore called me this morning wanting to know why you weren't credited for the chamber work. Dr. Andrews mentioned seeing your professional portfolio online. People are getting the wrong impression about our family dynamics. What's the wrong impression? Mom leaned forward, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. They're starting to think that your father takes credit for work you do, that our family's success is somehow dependent on your behind-the-scenes contributions. It's creating a very awkward social situation. Because it's true? It's not that. Simple, and you know it. Families support each other in different ways. Your father provides the vision and leadership. You help with technical execution. That's teamwork, not exploitation. Is that what you call never acknowledging my contributions? Teamwork? We've always appreciated what you do, Mom said, but her voice lacked conviction. Just because we don't make public announcements about family collaboration doesn't mean we don't value your help. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshot I'd taken of Dad's LinkedIn profile that morning. Look at his professional achievements section. Every major project listed there was created by me. Every award, every recognition, every client, success story, my work, his credit. Mom glanced at the screen but pushed the phone away. Social media profiles are just marketing tools. Everyone exaggerates their contributions. This isn't exaggeration. It's complete fabrication. Dad has been presenting my work as his own professional capability for 8 years. You're making this sound more dramatic than it needs to be. The important thing right now is managing the social fallout from this week's technical difficulties. People are asking uncomfortable questions. What kind of questions? Well, Mom shifted uncomfortably. Margaret Henderson asked me directly whether you'd been ghostwriting your father's community speeches. Apparently, someone mentioned that your writing style is very similar to his recent presentations. The revelation that people were starting to recognize my work through stylistic analysis was both validating and alarming. For years, I'd worried that my contributions were too invisible to matter. Now I was discovering they'd been too consistent to hide. And yesterday, Mom continued, the garden club president asked whether you'd be available to help with their fundraising campaign directly instead of working through me. Several members apparently saw your portfolio and want to hire you as an independent consultant. That sounds like a good opportunity. It's completely inappropriate. You can't compete with your own family's professional relationships. These are connections we've cultivated for years. Connections you've cultivated using my work. Mom's composure cracked slightly. This victim mentality isn't helping anyone, Daisy. Yes, families share resources and support each other's careers. That's how successful families operate. But undermining your father's reputation out of spite is just destructive. I haven't undermined anything. I've simply stopped doing unpaid work so I can focus on cancer treatment. The cancer excuse is wearing thin. Other people manage medical issues without abandoning their family obligations. The casual dismissal of my diagnosis as an excuse crystallized everything I'd been realizing about their perspective. Even now, facing public exposure of their dependence on my invisible labor, they couldn't acknowledge that I might have legitimate reasons for prioritizing my health. I need to go, I said, standing up from the table. We're not finished discussing this. The charity gala is in 3 weeks, and major donors are expecting the kind of professional coordination you've always provided. Hire a professional event planner. That's expensive and unnecessary when family can handle it. Family is currently handling cancer surgery. I left Mom sitting at the table, her face flushed with the kind of anger that comes from losing control of a narrative she'd spent years managing. The afternoon brought more evidence of how quickly word was spreading through Willowbrook's interconnected social and professional networks. My LinkedIn profile, which had been dormant for years, suddenly showed dozens of connection requests and messages from local business owners who'd discovered my portfolio. Saw your strategic analysis work. Exactly what our nonprofit needs. Interested in discussing consulting rates for digital marketing projects. Had no idea you were behind the Chamber's successful campaigns. Let's schedule a meeting. Meanwhile, my family's professional networks were unraveling in more visible ways. Dad's consulting website still displayed a suspension notice, and potential clients were calling asking for explanations. Mom's charity foundation site remained offline, causing donors to question the organization's professionalism. Most tellingly, social media had begun amplifying the story in ways none of us had anticipated. Someone had posted screenshots comparing Dad's old presentations with his recent failed chamber appearance, noting the dramatic difference in quality and substance. The post had been shared 47 times with comments ranging from supportive to scathing. Always wondered how Merrick Stone produced such polished work. Makes sense now. Family businesses are complicated, but taking credit for someone else's work is just wrong. Daisy Graham's portfolio shows incredible talent. Good. For her, for stepping out of the shadows. By evening, the story had evolved beyond professional gossip into a broader conversation about family dynamics, credit recognition, and women's invisible labor. My phone showed interview requests from 3 different local publications and 2 podcast invitations. The exposure was happening faster and more comprehensively than I'd anticipated. What had started as my personal decision to prioritize health over family obligations had become a public examination of how professional credit is distributed within family businesses. But the most surprising development came at 7 p.m. when Mrs. Chen knocked on my door with an unexpected visitor, my college roommate Sarah, who had driven 4 hours after seeing the social media posts about my situation. I came as soon as I heard, Sarah said, pulling me into a tight hug. Not just about the cancer, but about everything. I've been following the story online and I had to see if you were okay. You drove 4 hours because of social media posts? Daisy? This is huge. You're finally getting recognition for work you've been hiding for years. But more importantly, you're dealing with cancer, and your family's response has been to complain about their website being down. I realized that the public exposure wasn't just revealing my family's professional dependence on my invisible labor. It was also exposing their emotional inadequacy in a way that resonated with people who understood what genuine family support should look like. The story was no longer just about me reclaiming credit for my work. It had become a broader conversation about what family really means when someone you love is facing a life-threatening illness. And judging by the continued stream of supportive messages from community members I barely knew, public opinion was forming strong judgments about both sides of that question. Surgery day arrived on a crisp Friday morning in late October, the I-me-tea kind of autumn day that made Brookhaven Heights feel like a postcard. Mrs. Chen picked me up at 6 a.m., her small sedan warm with the smell of fresh coffee and the kind of quiet comfort that comes from genuine care. "How are you feeling, dear?" she asked as we drove toward Willowbrook General Hospital. "Strangely calm," I replied. And it was true. After 8 years of carrying other people's anxiety, facing my own medical crisis felt almost peaceful by comparison. That's the clarity talking. Sometimes we need to lose something to realize what really matters. The surgery went smoothly, according to Dr. Patterson. The tumor was contained, margins were clear, and while I would need follow-up treatment, the prognosis was excellent. I woke up in recovery feeling groggy but hopeful for the first time in months. My phone showed dozens of messages from community members, former colleagues, and new professional contacts wishing me well. Mrs. Chen had updated my social media with surgery progress, and the response was overwhelming in its warmth. What was missing spoke volumes. No messages from Dad asking about surgical results. No flowers from Mom. No visit from Alaric to check on my recovery. Instead, I had 3 voicemails about family obligations. Mom's message was apologetic but urgent. "Daisy, I hope the surgery went well, but we have a crisis. The charity gala is next week and nothing is organized. Major donors are asking questions, and the venue coordinator is threatening to cancel our contract. I know you're recovering, but could you at least make some phone calls?" Dad's voicemail was more direct. "The chamber leadership election is Monday, and my presentation materials are still incomplete. I need those research files you worked on last month. This is important for our family's standing in the community." Alaric's message was the most tone-deaf. "Hope you're feeling better. Quick question. Do you still have access to my professional development files? I have a performance review next week, and I need those portfolio samples you put together." Even on surgery day, their primary concern was how my medical treatment affected their convenience. The breaking point came Sunday evening when I received an unexpected phone call from my Aunt Joanne, Dad's sister, who lived in the next town over. "Daisy, honey, I need to ask you something directly, and I want you to be honest with me." "Of course, Aunt Joanne. Is it true that you've been doing professional work for your father and brother all these years? Writing their presentations and managing their business operations?" The question hung heavy between us. Aunt Joanne had always been the family truth-teller, the one who asked uncomfortable questions at gatherings and refused to accept polite deflections. "Yes, it's true." "For how long?" 8 years, since I graduated college." A long pause. "And they never gave you credit or proper compensation for this work?" "No. They presented it as family collaboration, but publicly it was always attributed to them." "Jesus Christ," Aunt Joanne muttered. "And now they're upset that you've stopped working for free while you're dealing with cancer?" They've characterized it as me abandoning family obligations out of spite. Spite? You have cancer, for God's sake. What kind of family gets angry at someone for prioritizing medical treatment? I found myself telling Aunt Joanne the whole story. The salt passing incident, the years of invisible labor, the systematic dismissal of my contributions. the complete lack of support during my diagnosis. "I'm calling a family meeting," she said when I finished. "This ends now. I'm not watching my brother and his family treat you like unpaid staff while you're fighting for your health." "Aunt Joanne, that's not necessary." "It absolutely is necessary. Your grandmother is rolling over in her grave watching this family dysfunction. We're meeting at my house next Sunday. Everyone will be there, including your cousins from out of state. It's time some truths got told." The family meeting was scheduled for Sunday afternoon at Aunt Joanne's house in Maplewood, a 30-minute drive from Willowbrook. I arrived still feeling tender from surgery, but clearer than I'd felt in years. The house was fuller than usual. Not just immediate family, but cousins, spouses, and even some family friends who had known us for decades. Aunt Joanne had clearly orchestrated this gathering to ensure maximum witnesses for whatever confrontation was about to unfold. Dad sat stiffly in the living room armchair that had always been his preferred throne at family gatherings. Mom perched beside him on the sofa, her usual social smile replaced by barely controlled anxiety. Alaric stood near the kitchen doorway, as if planning a quick escape route. The extended family filled the remaining chairs and couch space, their expressions ranging from curious to concerned. Cousin Talira had driven in from Colorado. Uncle Cedric was there with his wife, and several family friends from Dad's professional network had accepted Aunt Joanne's invitation. "Before we begin," Aunt Joanne announced to the room, "I want everyone to understand why we're here. This isn't about airing dirty laundry or creating family drama. This is about addressing a situation that has gone on too long and needs immediate resolution." She turned to Dad. "Merrick, I've been hearing some disturbing things about how you and your family have been treating Daisy, especially since her cancer diagnosis. I think it's time we had an honest conversation about family dynamics." Dad's jaw tightened. "Joanne, this is really a private family matter. I don't think we need to involve. The entire community is already involved." "Aunt," Joanne cut him off. "Half of Willowbrook is talking about your professional difficulties and questioning your business practices. This stopped being private when you made it public." She gestured toward me. "Daisy, I want you to tell everyone here exactly what happened. At dinner 3 weeks ago when you told your family about your cancer diagnosis." The room fell silent. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me, and for the first time in 8 years of family gatherings, I was the center of attention for something other than serving or cleanup duties. "I told them I had breast cancer," I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Dad's response was to ask Mom to pass the salt. Mom laughed nervously and changed the subject to Alaric's promotion. No one asked about my prognosis, my treatment plan, or whether I needed support. Gasps and murmurs circled the room. "Cousin." Tahlira shook her head in disgust. Uncle Cedric stared at his brother with an expression I'd never seen before. "That can't be accurate," Mom interjected quickly. "We were shocked by the news. Sometimes people react to difficult information in unexpected ways." "What did you do after dinner?" Aunt Joanne asked me. "I went home and decided to stop managing their professional obligations so I could focus on cancer treatment. I canceled the services I'd been providing and withdrew my financial support from Dad's business." "What services?" asked Cousin Marcus, who had always admired Dad's professional success. I pulled out my phone and opened the notes I'd prepared. For 8 years, I wrote Dad's speeches, presentations, and client proposals. I managed all their websites and social media accounts. I handled crisis management and reputation repair. I researched and wrote the materials that secured Alaric's promotions. I provided strategic consulting for Mom's charity work. I lent Dad's business nearly $80,000 that was never repaid. The room erupted in shocked conversations. Family members turned to each other, processing information that reframed decades of assumptions about our family dynamics. "Wait," said Uncle Cedric slowly. "You wrote Merrick's community leadership speeches? The ones that won him those awards?" "Every word. including his acceptance speeches. And the business presentations that secured his major contracts? All of them. I have the original drafts with timestamps and revision history. Dad stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger. This is ridiculous. Daisy provided some research assistance and technical support, but she's exaggerating her contributions to make herself sound more important. Show them the LinkedIn profile, Aunt Joanne said to me. I pulled up Dad's professional profile on my phone and handed it to Uncle Cedric. Every achievement listed there represents work I did. Every major project, every client success story, every professional milestone, created by me, credited to him. Uncle Cedric studied the screen, then passed it to others. The silence grew heavier as people absorbed the scope of the deception. Merrick, Aunt Joanne said quietly, is this true? It's more complicated than she's making it sound, Dad replied, but his voice had lost its usual commanding tone. Families support each other professionally. Daisy has always been good with technical details and writing, so she helped polish our materials. That's what families do. Polish materials? I stood up, my post-surgery discomfort forgotten in the clarity of finally speaking truth. Dad, I didn't polish your materials. I created them from scratch. You never wrote a word of your community speeches. You never researched a single market trend for your business presentations. You never developed one strategic insight for your consulting work. You're being dramatic. Am I? I pulled out printed copies of documents I'd prepared for this moment. These are the original drafts of your last 3 major presentations, written entirely by me, on my laptop, in my apartment. Your contribution was reading them aloud to clients. I distributed copies around the room. The evidence was undeniable. Timestamps, revision histories, metadata showing my authorship of work that had built Dad's professional reputation. Alaric finally spoke up from his position near the kitchen. This is getting out of hand. Yes, Daisy helped with some writing projects, but I earned my promotions through hard work and performance. Show them the Morrison account presentation, Aunt Joanne said to me. I pulled up the file on my laptop and projected it onto Aunt Joanne's wall-mounted television. This is the presentation that secured Alaric's promotion to Senior Vice President. Every analysis, every strategic recommendation, every market insight, researched and written by me while he played golf. The evidence filled the screen, undeniable in its scope and detail. I spent 3 weeks researching industry trends, analyzing competitor strategies, and developing the financial projections that impressed his supervisors. Alaric's contribution was scheduling the meeting. Cousin Tahlira spoke into the stunned silence. So let me understand this correctly. For 8 years, Daisy has been ghostwriting professional materials, managing business operations, and providing financial support. And when she announced she had cancer and needed to focus on treatment, your response was to complain about inconvenience to your schedules? We were concerned about her health, Mom said weakly. But family businesses require everyone to contribute. Family businesses? Aunt Joanne's voice rose. This isn't a family business. This is systematic exploitation of unpaid labor while taking full credit for the results. She turned to address the entire room. I've listened to Merrick brag for years about his professional achievements. At every family gathering, every holiday dinner, every community event, awards, recognition, business success, all built on work his daughter did while living in a modest apartment and being treated like the family disappointment. The room was completely silent now, the weight of revelation settling over decades. Of family gatherings where I'd been marginalized while my ghost-written achievements were celebrated under other names. And the most damning part, Aunt Joanne continued, is that when she finally needed something from this family, support during cancer treatment, you asked her to pass the salt and then assigned her more unpaid work. Dad made one last attempt at control. Joanne, you don't understand the full situation. Daisy chose to help with family projects. No one forced her to contribute. I stood up again, facing him directly for the first time in my adult life. "Dad, I spent 8 years hoping that if I contributed enough, if I made you successful enough, if I solved enough problems and wrote enough speeches and managed enough crises, you would finally see me as valuable, as family." My voice grew stronger, as years of suppressed truth finally found expression. "But when I got cancer and needed you to see me as a person instead of a resource, you couldn't even pause your dinner to acknowledge my diagnosis. You built your reputation on my invisible labor, and when I stopped being invisible, you called it a tantrum." The room remained silent, 20 witnesses to a confrontation that had been building for 8 years. "I don't need your approval anymore," I continued. "I don't need your acknowledgement or your gratitude or your recognition. I need to survive cancer and build a life where my worth isn't measured by my usefulness to people who can't love me enough to care when I'm dying." Dad's face had gone pale, his usual commanding presence completely deflated. Mom stared at her hands. Alaric had retreated into the kitchen entirely. Aunt Joanne broke the silence. "Daisy, what do you need from this family going forward?" "Nothing," I replied, and meant it completely. "I need them to stop calling me selfish for prioritizing cancer treatment. I need them to stop demanding unpaid labor while I'm recovering from surgery. And I need them to understand that their professional failures are not my responsibility to solve." The confrontation was over. Not because anyone had apologized or acknowledged wrongdoing, but because the truth had finally been spoken in front of witnesses who could no longer pretend they didn't see what had been happening. The family meeting dissolved into small conversations as people processed what they'd witnessed. Several cousins approached me with support and offers of help. Professional contacts who had been present began discussing genuine career opportunities. But the most significant conversation happened as I was leaving. Aunt Joanne walked me to my car and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "I'm proud of you for finally speaking your truth," she said. "It took tremendous courage. Thank you for creating the space for it to happen. That family owes you more than they'll ever be able to repay. But more importantly, you owe yourself a life where your contributions are valued and your health is prioritized." Driving home to Brookhaven Heights, I realized that the confrontation had accomplished something I hadn't expected. Not their acknowledgement or apology, those might never come. But the public witnessing of truth by people whose opinions mattered to them. For 8 years, I'd been invisible to everyone who mattered. Now, thanks to my family's public breakdown and today's confrontation, I was finally visible as myself, rather than as their unpaid support system. The reckoning was complete. What remained was building a life worthy of the woman who had finally found the courage to claim her own voice. 6 months later, I sat in my new office in downtown Willowbrook, reviewing client proposals for my strategic consulting firm. The space was modest, but entirely mine. Sunlight streaming through windows that faced the river, walls decorated with properly credited work samples, and a desk that held only my own projects and priorities. The breast cancer treatment had been successful. Clear margins from surgery, targeted radiation therapy, and hormone suppression medication had given me an excellent prognosis. My hair was growing back in soft waves, and my energy had returned stronger than before. But the real healing had happened in ways that had nothing to do with medical treatment. My consulting business had grown beyond anything I'd imagined possible. The Chamber of Commerce had hired me directly for their digital transformation project. The Willowbrook Community Foundation had engaged my services for strategic planning. Local nonprofits, small businesses, and even some regional corporations had discovered what I could accomplish when my talents were properly recognized and compensated. Most importantly, I was no longer invisible. My work carried my name, my insights were attributed correctly, and my professional reputation belonged entirely to me. The office door chimed as Mrs. Chen entered carrying her usual offering of afternoon tea. "How are you feeling today, dear?" she asked, settling into the client chair with the easy familiarity of someone who had become genuine family. Grateful, I replied honestly. 6 months ago, I thought cancer was the worst thing that could happen. To me. Now I realize it saved my life in ways I never expected. Clarity often comes disguised as crisis, she observed. Your grandmother would be proud of what you've built here. Through my office window, I could see the Hillcrest Country Club across the river where the confrontation with my family had begun. The dining room where Dad had asked Mom to pass the salt while I announced my cancer diagnosis felt like a scene from someone else's life. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, who had become my closest friend during recovery. Dinner tonight? I have news about the new job offer. The support network I'd built over the past 6 months was small but genuine. People who cared about my health, celebrated my professional successes, and offered help without expecting anything in return. The difference between chosen family and blood relations had never been clearer. My biological family had faced consequences they'd never anticipated. Dad's consulting business had struggled without the invisible infrastructure I'd provided. Several clients had left after discovering the true source of his professional capabilities. Mom's charity work had become significantly more difficult without my strategic planning and donor management systems. Alaric had been passed over for his next promotion when his performance review revealed gaps in the analytical thinking his supervisors had expected based on previous presentations. But the most significant consequence was social. Willowbrook's professional community was small and interconnected. Word had spread about their treatment of me during my cancer diagnosis, and public opinion had shifted decisively. They were no longer viewed as a successful family, but as people who had exploited and dismissed a daughter facing life-threatening illness. I felt no satisfaction from their struggles, but I felt no guilt either. They had created their own consequences, through 8 years of systematic dismissal and exploitation. The afternoon mail brought an unexpected envelope with familiar handwriting. A card from Dad, the first communication since the family meeting 6 months earlier. Inside was a brief note. Daisy, I hope you're recovering well. I've been thinking about our conversation at Joanne's house. Perhaps we could meet for coffee sometime to discuss the situation. Not an apology. Not acknowledgement of wrongdoing. A proposal to discuss the situation as if my cancer diagnosis and their response were simply a misunderstanding that could be resolved through negotiation. I placed the card in my desk drawer without responding. Some relationships couldn't be repaired because they had never been healthy to begin with. My family had shown me exactly who they were when I needed them most, and I had finally learned to believe them. That evening, I hosted dinner at my apartment. For my chosen family, Mrs. Chen, Sarah, Dr. Patterson's nurse who had become a friend, and several colleagues from my new professional network. The conversation flowed easily among people who knew my real story and valued my actual contributions. As we cleared dishes, Sarah raised her glass for a toast. To Daisy, who taught us all that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well and being visible for who you really are. The toast rang through my small dining room, warmer and more genuine than any celebration I'd experienced at fancy country club dinners where my achievements were credited to other people. Looking around the table at faces that reflected genuine affection and respect, I realized I had accomplished something I'd spent 8 years trying to achieve with my biological family. I had found people who saw me as valuable, not for what I could do for them, but for who I was as a person. The cancer diagnosis that had seemed like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of the life I'd always deserved. A life where my worth wasn't measured by my usefulness to people who couldn't love me enough to care when I was dying. I was no longer carrying anyone else's weight. And for the first time in my adult life, that felt exactly like freedom. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload. from us.